Well, welcome back. We're on our final module. I can't believe we have breezed through today's content. You all are the very best audience. Thank you for your engagement and for letting this session go as smoothly as it has. Alyssa is going to advance to the start of this module 5, where we're going to talk about training, the conditions and compliance. So our learning objectives today include understanding the framework of general and special conditions for State of Maryland Governor's Office of Crime Prevention and Policy grants, identifying key areas of compliance required by GOCPP, learning about the recent update to the de minimis indirect cost rate under SB 127, recognizing the implications of this change for GOCPP grantees, pardon me, and probably relevant to all of us is this accessing resources for navigating GOCPP grant requirements. When we do have questions, where do we go? Next slide. So what are the rules of engagement? Grant conditions are those essential terms that will define for us the responsibilities we have when accepting and managing GOCPP funds. The purpose here is to ensure our proper stewardship of the funds, to promote accountability and transparency, to achieve program objectives, and of course, to mitigate risks, including fraud, which we've discussed at length today. The two main types of these grant conditions include general and special conditions. Under general conditions, we look at things like standard rules applicable to all or most grants. And under special conditions, we include things that are specific to a particular grant award or project. Next slide. Our general conditions are those universal rules representing the standard set of regulations that will apply across most GOCPP grant awards. We find them typically in the grant agreement package or referenced in our grants management system portal. These general conditions ensure our consistent compliance with overarching state and federal regulations. So, for example, under the second Code of Federal Regulations, Part 200, Uniform Guidance for Federal Funds, which is governing this grants management process, we're ensuring that we're compliant through the state of Maryland with that overarching state and federal regulation, because the state of Maryland is going to be going back and regularly updating all of the resources in the grants management system portal. And we must then, of course, do our due diligence in checking it. The key areas covered there are financial management, reporting, procurement, record keeping, personnel, and audit requirements. Next slide. Our key general condition number 1 is compliance with laws and regulations. A fundamental requirement is strict adherence to all applicable federal, state, and local laws and regulations. For example, under 2 CFR Part 200 Uniform Guidance for Federal Pass-Through Funds that governs most Maryland GOCPP grants, Maryland State Finance and Procurement Article, the Civil Rights Acts, the Americans with Disabilities Acts, and the environmental regulations. The implication here being that ignorance of the law is not an excuse for noncompliance. So we can, in fact, be held accountable for things that we are not familiar with, aware of, or things that we don't understand. Next slide, please. Key condition under general conditions, number 2, financial management standards. Grantees must maintain robust financial management systems that meet both federal and state standards for accountability. The key aspects of this include accurate records, complete and correct financial data. So that we talk about the accuracy and adequacy of information contained in our financial records, the internal controls, the effective systems that will safeguard our assets and ensure their reliability over time and other constraints. As discussed in Module 3, accountability. Are there clear audit trails for all expenditures that identify clearly who the accountable personnel was involved in that transaction? Allowability. We must, of course, ensure that all costs charged to the grant are permissible under the grant agreement, and timeliness, prompt recording of transactions with documentation. The impact here is directly preventing financial fraud and misuse of funds by having all of these control measures in place. Next slide. Key general condition number 3 is record keeping and retention of records. And Eric, if you're there, can you tell us how many years after our grant reporting and closeout process is complete, we must maintain those records? Because it differs. I know for teachers, it's a certain number of years. For lawyers, it's a certain number of years. What is the grant under 2 CFR? How many years must we maintain those records?
Yeah, so the standard on Title II, Part 200, is for 3 years from the date of submission of the final expenditure report. So that's the standard. But each agency, remember, has the opportunity to modify those certain parts of the record retention requirement. And there are also matters that require a hold. So if there's active litigation, or if you have indirect cost rates that are still being utilized, assets that were purchased under awards that have not been disposed of, things of that nature can cause records to have to be retained for a longer period of time. So the devil is in the details, and we want to make sure that we're aware of what needs to be reviewed. So GOCPP has their requirements within the standard terms and conditions, and then the federal government, of course, has its requirements as well within the uniform guidance, which to your earlier comment is codified in 2 CFR 2 Part 200. Other item to be aware of, though, is that the state of Maryland also has different record retention requirements depending on your organization type for certain types of records that could be longer than what has already been communicated in the GOCPP requirement or in the uniform guidance. So consult with legal counsel if you have questions on record retention, because there are three different governing bodies of rules that one has to comply with. Whatever's more restrictive is that you must make sure you check the box on.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Russell.
You're welcome.
So the third general condition for record keeping and retention, of course, is that we have the maintenance in place for at least 3 years of accurate and complete records for that specified retention period. And that, of course, demonstrates our proper use of funds and records and maintains that information over at least a 3-year time period. The records include invoices, receipts, payroll records, timesheets, contracts, performance data, participant lists, and communications with GOCPP or GOCPP. And one thing that's important here is that whoever your administrative staff is, their front office, clerical staff, should be proficient in cataloging, information. So it has to be organized so that you can just look book by book, line by line, and there's consistency in the cataloging of that information. Working in law firm or working as a collaborative person with other teams, people have their own nomenclature with file naming and organization, but it's important there that you establish what the standard semantic or nomenclature will be for your filing systems, electronically in particular, but also in the actual hard copy files that you keep in your file drawers so that they can be retrieved readily. Are there numbers like the Dewey Decimal System that you have in your office? Or if not numbers, is there another way that your office identifies things, and have people been familiarized with that record keeping system so that they can understand it, and pull those documents readily when asked for them. That retention period, of course, is 3 years, and the importance here is that it's crucial for auditing, monitoring, and demonstrating compliance. And not having records is a major audit finding. So it's important that we maintain those records. Thank you. Next slide, please. General condition number 4 that's critical is our reporting requirements. Timely and accurate submission of financial and programmatic reports is mandatory. It's required to keep GOCPP informed of the grant's progress. These reports include our financial reports detailing expenditures, drawdowns, and unspent balances, programmatic reports describing activities, the progress that we're making toward our objectives and the outcomes we've achieved thus far, and any gaps that we still intend to close before the grant closeout period. The progress report might include an interim update on project status so that we know briefly how we're doing so far. And then, of course, the closeout report is a final summary of financial and programmatic activity. The grants management system is GOCPP's grants management system portal for most reporting. And just be reminded here, we'll string on our fingers that late or inaccurate reports can lead to payment delays or grant suspension. And so one thing you learn in certain fields, particularly things like legal fields where there's so many deadlines and you've got a book of, let's say, 50 to 75 clients working simultaneously on various tasks within each case, you might want to put calendar ticklers on the tasks themselves related to that, not just the due date for the closeout report, progress report, programmatic report, and financial report, but let's break that down step by step. What does each part entail? What are the dependencies there? Who do you need to reach out to? All of that could be detailed on a calendar reminder for the parties involved on your project management or knowledge management, knowledge transfer, knowledge sharing type of platform, so that everybody has visibility who needs to have visibility, and so that you're reminded promptly in advance of the submission deadlines that that task needs to be completed timely. Next slide. The key general condition number 5 in your auditing requirement is that your grant may be subject to various audits. Automatically auditing does occur. So this emphasizes the need for meticulous record keeping and compliance readiness. I love the use of that word because Eric has already indicated the devil here is in the details. And that I that we talk about when we talk about cataloging and filing, it's hard to come by. You try to hire an executive administrator or a liaison who is proficient in that type of front office management and clerical management, and then have them train the other staff who are new coming to the organization as you grow. It can be a very difficult task, not only to train people on, but to get them to be proficient enough to continue to use it, even in misspelling file names that prevent you from researching using your search bar. Those types of little errors can make a difference in your timing. And so a single audit under uniform guidance is required for non-federal entities that expend $1 million or more in federal awards in a fiscal year. A state audit under GOCPP may conduct its own monitoring visits or audits, whether or not you're alerted to their presence prior to their arrival. And then the purpose here, of course, is that we're ensuring the compliance with grant terms, financial accuracy, and that the internal controls that we have in place are effective as they're supposed to be effective toward the processes and procedures that will control risk and mitigate any deviations or fraud. In preparation, maintaining organized records cannot be understated. Be ready to provide documentation without stumbling upon the need to go to a warehouse that's 50 miles away and then not having the time or staff to be able to accomplish that task, or the warehouse is closed when you are able to get there. You know, those types of little challenges logistically may arise. And so you really want to be prepared for that type of thing. And that's where cloud storage has been a brilliant gift to all of us in the modern age. Next slide, please. Key general condition number 6 in our procurement standards: adhering to specific procurement standards ensures fair, open, and transparent purchasing of goods and services with the grant funds. So the key principles under the uniform guidance is competition is encouraged fully and openly. We're not preventing or barring anybody from entering into the competitive process, not just for bidding, but of course, to secure the contract. So not just in the application, but actual decision-making process is fully transparent and open to that type of competition. And then documenting all procedures therein by maintaining the records of the procurement history, running our cost and price analyses, ensuring that our pricing is in fact reasonable against current market standards and trends. Whether or not there's a conflict of interest has been documented or avoided. So avoiding actual or apparent conflicts of interest. And when we realize that the conflict of interest emerges, whether it's 6 degrees of separation or 3, we document that and report it accordingly. And then in selecting vendors and suppliers, we're doing so based upon qualifications and price, not because they're a friend of a friend or a family member and so forth. And the impact there is that we will prevent bid rigging, kickbacks after having secured contracts and so forth, and then ensuring that we're getting the best cost value for the grant funds we were awarded and not overpaying for the same supplies and services that we would otherwise secure at a lower rate. Next slide. Key general condition number 7 is our personnel standards. Proper standards for human capital, as we're referred to in industry, including accurate time and effort reporting, are essential for legitimate charging of staff costs to grants. And it can be tricky because there are federal laws already governing certain staff, who, particularly those who are contractors or hourly rate service providers, as it pertains to documentation of time, whether it be an electronic report or written report. The accuracy of that information, alignment of that information with what is reported in the initial personnel file, and all of that is very important. And so accurately documenting time spent on grant activities and the effort spent thereon is very important. Salary caps adhere to federal and state salary limitations. Staff who work with vulnerable population like youth and victims of violence, such as domestic violence and so forth, must undergo background checks that are very comprehensive, not just the minimal background check process, but a more thorough background check procedure. And then non-discrimination is very important in compliance with equal opportunity laws at the federal and state level. And the impact here is that it prevents ghost employees and ensures proper allocation of personnel costs. Next slide. Key general condition number 8 on subrecipient monitoring. If we're passing funds through to a subrecipient awarded a portion of our grant to effectuate some portion of the programmatic or project thrust, then you and your organization as the prime grantee are responsible for monitoring their compliance with all grant terms. And that becomes laborious if there are no processes and procedures of internal control already in place for them. So the key responsibilities the prime grantee has here is performing the risk assessment of the subrecipient in an objective way using forms, rubrics, and so forth. including proper terms and conditions in the subaward agreement, and meeting regularly to get updates as to adherence thereto, deviations therefrom, challenges people might be facing, and then monitoring the activities of the subrecipient awardee. And the financial reports is important, not just receiving them in your inbox and filing them away later, but maybe having a recurring cadence of meetings whereby you take a look at the snapshot data, visualize it on a chart in 30 minutes, and talk through any changes, updates, spikes in the graph, that kind of thing. So you're always aware and have visibility and line of sight into things that may come through you as prime grantee as a red flag, and then ensuring subrecipient audit compliance. Has your auditing procedure internally been adhered to by the subrecipient, and then taking appropriate action on non-compliance when it has not, so that in the event of an external audit or even an audit from the state GOCPP office, you have some documentation or procedure in place through that flow chart and decision tree matrix whereby non-compliance has been fully addressed. And so the impact there is the prevention of subrecipient fraud and the ensuring of overall grant compliance by both the subrecipient and you, who of course has designated that subrecipient as wholly capable of managing their part of that grant. Next slide, please. Special conditions do include project-specific rules beyond general rules. And so special conditions are those unique requirements that are actually tailored specifically to your individual grant award. And we find them explicitly stated within the individual GOCPP grant award document. They're very important because they're equally as binding as the general conditions. And they also must be carefully reviewed and understood. For instance, they may include specific deliverables for you. They may include specific budgetary restrictions or unique reporting frequencies that somehow deviate or occur in addition to those you see under the general conditions, given the type of grant funds or managing process that you have in place for your specific grant. Next slide, please. So let's give some examples of special conditions that are more illustrative. And these will show how special conditions can impose specific requirements on the grant. For example, grant by grant variance may occur if and when a grantee must achieve 80% participant retention by month 6 of the project period. That's a very high retention rate for these types of grants. Especially if you're talking about having to meet the beneficiaries on a face-to-face basis. Another example is that funds having to be allocated for equipment may not exceed $10,000 without prior written approval from GOCPP. And what does that prior written approval entail? How long does it take to get? And so forth. And what amount is the minimum and maximum on that prior approval request? Can I request $1,000 once a month, or is there a maximum number of requests that can be made on prior approvals? And if there's a maximum number of requests, what is the maximum amount I can request total and request per request, that kind of thing. And then the grantee must submit quarterly progress reports by the 15th of the month following the end of each quarter. So that's on top of your other reports. Then, of course, that becomes another report, some more calendar ticklers, task by task, portion by portion of what that progress report would entail. The specific personnel qualifications that are required for the project director, the master's degree in social work, and so forth. And when that master's degree in social work is in place, is there any attrition out of that specialty for that particular role? And if so, does the next replacement who, after that person turned over, does their replacement also have that same degree or status? And then the grantee must provide 25% non-federal matching funds documented by a specific method in order to receive that grant, and continue to demonstrate that those 25% non-federal matching funds are available readily in a certain account by providing statements or something, that kind of thing. And so the key here is that we must always read through and be sure we understand what those specific grant award conditions are, and whether, if we do have any questions, whether we've had each of them addressed thoroughly so we have full clarity on them. Next slide. Focusing on indirect costs, the overhead challenge. So now we turn our attention to indirect costs, which will cover the essential overhead expenses of our organization. So direct costs are directly attributable to the specific grant, and that includes our program staff salaries and project supplies. Indirect costs are shared costs that support multiple programs, such as overhead. And so the importance here is proper accounting for indirect costs, and that being crucial for financial compliance and full cost recovery. Just like when we're reporting our federal taxes, this same level of scrutiny might apply, and the same sanctions, penalty, fines, and so forth can apply as well in the event that there is any auditing that we fail to successfully overcome. Next slide. 2 CFR Part 200 under the Uniform Guidance and Indirect Costs provides that there are specific types of costs, allowable costs that are permitted by the grant terms and regulations, allocable costs that will directly benefit this specific grant, and reasonable costs, those that are prudent person or person of reasonable, whatever, would conceive of as being reasonable. And that prudent person test might be better defined. Mr. Russell, do you have any other elaboration on the prudent person test? How do they define that, or how do they determine?
Yeah, so the prudent person component is really just asking whether or not, or determining whether or not you would pay more than market value. So in practice, that's how we do the analysis. And with the assumption being that an individual would not pay more than market value if they are prudent. Now, what is market value becomes the question. So that's one of the reasons we require competition. So you meet that requirement through the conduct of competitive procurements. And that gives us an opportunity to detect or to calculate what a market range would be based on open competition. So that's kind of the way that we interpret the requirement and how we satisfy it. Is that what you're asking?
Yes. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And so here we have recovery methods that include negotiated indirect cost rate agreements with a federal agency and de minimis indirect cost rates. And that, of course, probably fluctuates with the consumer price index and everything else. So we need to keep our eye on that 2 CFR 200, and of course, on the GOCPP guidance that is provided in our grants management system portal. Okay. Next slide, please. The de minimis indirect cost rate is a simpler option that offers a streamlined method for certain organizations to recover indirect costs without needing a complex negotiated rate. It works as a fixed percentage applied to a modified total direct cost base. The benefits of the de minimis indirect cost rate is that it reduces administrative burden for smaller organizations or those that have complex accounting systems. The previous rate under 2 CFR 200 allowed a 10% de minimis rate indirect cost rate for those cost deductions from direct cost expenses, or what would it be, from overhead expenses and so forth. Is that right, Mr. Russell? Am I saying it right? The 10% is you take 10% of your overhead and deduct that as a part of your expenses under the grant. under the de minimis rule?
I have a slight inundation to it, I guess. So the 10% is what you would multiply in the past, before October 1st of 2024. You would multiply 10% times the modified total direct cost of your award. And that would give you the maximum indirect cost that one could recover under using the de minimis under that.
In 2 miles, award. Take exit 220 toward Barnum.
That's kind of the old rule. It's the 10%. Subsequent to October 1st of 2024, then you can take up to 15% of the modified total direct cost as your indirect cost amount. But all of that is contingent upon your organization being eligible to use the de minimis indirect cost rate, meaning you cannot already have a negotiated indirect cost rate agreement. You cannot be charging under another federal award anything other than the de minimis indirect cost rate. So you can't negotiate under Award A and and you cannot be one of those organization types appearing in Appendix 7 guidance that's required to and unless you are only receiving funding as a subrecipient, then Appendix 7 makes mention of a development of an indirect cost rate proposal. So you're eligible to use the de minimis before you assume those rates are available.
In a half mile, take exit.
Okay. Thank you. Keep your eyes on the road.
Take exit 220, then turn left onto.
All right, thank you.
I was like, I thought I lost you. I was like, oh no, I get my hands.
No, some of what you said kind of went in and out. So if anybody has any questions about the de minimis versus negotiated direct and indirect cost rates, please don't hesitate to place them in the chat. And of course, during the Q&A, if we're not able to address them verbally here on this session live, we will get written responses to you very soon. Thank you. Next slide. So the SB 127 that went into effect on July 1, 2025 is State of Maryland's update, a significant update for grantees in the state of Maryland that changed the de minimis indirect cost rate to 15%, which is what Mr. Russell just discussed. That, of course, is Senate Bill 127. Of course, the updating of the de minimis indirect cost rate from 10 to 15% for state agencies and pass-through entities, of course, who are not under negotiated agreements. It occurred because acknowledging the rising overhead costs faced by organizations was critical and, of course, paramount to ensure the success and livelihood of the grants programs within the state of Maryland's purview. And this aims to provide more equitable cost recovery, the impact being a significant positive change for many grantees that will allow them to recover a larger portion of their legitimate indirect costs. And Ms. Shuffler of the Maryland Legal Aid is noting that the negotiated cost rates for recent grants has confusing language on the use of the de minimis rate that could be cleared up. It says something about whether an entity has ever had a negotiated rate as opposed to currently. And so if they have ever had, then they still could not use the de minimis rate. But that is not correct according to the new SB 127 and what Mr. Russell also verified. So thank you for pointing that out, Ms. Schaffler, pardon me. And thank you for saying so. All right, next slide, please. So GOCPP's adoption of this 15% de minimis cost rate was confirmed by the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention and Policy. It's documented under the GMS portal system application instructions listed on page 18 of the grants management system application, and the GOCAP general conditions that are stated for subawards that went into effect July 1 and beyond. It has also been confirmed GOCAP has officially adopted the de minimis cost indirect cost rate of 15% that aligns with SB 127, meaning if the organization is eligible and chooses to use the de minimis cost rate, then the organization can now claim 15% of the modified total direct cost for their indirect costs on GOCAP grants effective July 1 and beyond. And you know if the organization is eligible based upon language in your agreement. If there is a negotiated cost rate in place under your agreement, then you would not use de minimis 15% indirect cost rate. And that being one of the examples, I think there are some others. And of course, we'll highlight, if you don't mind, Ms. Flynn, highlighting that question. How do you know if the organization is eligible? So we're sure we're to address each element of that answer thoroughly. Thank you for asking that question. So what does this mean for you as the grantee? Increases the eligible grantees who can now recover a larger portion of the indirect costs on new and modified GOCAP grants. For budgeting purposes, when preparing new grant applications or budget modifications for grants that went into effect on or after July 1, you can now budget for the 15% de minimis indirect cost rate. It still applies to organizations that have never had a federally negotiated indirect cost rate. If you have a current negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, you must use that rate. So remember, the rate is applied to modified total direct costs, which generally excludes capital expenditures, flow-through funds, and certain other direct costs. So here's the action point for the organization. You, as the grantee, must review the GOCAP's latest guidance carefully for specific application instructions, and of course, go back to your grant agreement and determine whether there's a negotiated indirect cost rate agreement in place. If you still are unsure and unclear about using the de minimis indirect cost rate versus the negotiated indirect cost rate listed in your agreement for whatever reason, as you list the modified total direct cost, then there are resources there on the GOCAP website that will help to answer those questions by providing you a support network of individuals who may also be able to answer you based upon your specific situation.
And I think, Ayana, one thing just to clarify on that one is if you have a negotiated rate, then the de minimis is not an option at all. So there's really no clarification needed on that one. You are ineligible to use a de minimis indirect cost rate if you have a negotiated indirect cost rate at all. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it's one or the other, basically.
Yeah, it's one or the other. There's no decision to make it if you've already negotiated a rate. And that's what's kind of causing a lot of challenges throughout the country, is that you've got different, I'll say, silos of organizations managing indirect costs. So one unit has a rate, another doesn't, but the organization is viewed as a whole. So if your organization has a rate at all, you're ineligible to use the de minimis.
Okay, sounds good.
Yep. So it's one of the few things that we have in black and white and clear and actually clear in the grant space, right? Usually it's like a little bit of mud here and there, and then maybe a snowstorm, and then we come out to clarity.
Okay. All right, so here's an example on calculating the de minimis indirect cost. Scenario being the GOCAP grant that was effective July 1 had $100,000 in eligible modified total direct costs. We calculate with the old rate, 100,000 of modified total direct costs times 10%, we've got $10,000 in indirect costs. We calculate with the new rate, we've got 15% now after July 1 in de minimis indirect costs at $15,000 in indirect costs under that new calculation. There's a $5,000 additional dollars in recoverable indirect costs in that example. Okay, next slide. Compliance with conditions, obviously very important. Strict adherence to all grant conditions is non-negotiable for ensuring accountability, program success, and your organization's reputation. You have a legal obligation under the grant agreement, which is a legally binding contract. Your financial integrity will ensure that the funds are used as intended and accounted for properly. Your program's success, compliance therewith will support your effective program delivery. Your organization's reputational standing with GOCAP and other funders will be sound through your compliance procedures, and you will ensure that you are eligible for future grant funding with a strong compliance record. So this means a proactive approach as opposed to a reactive approach will be best in integrating compliance into your daily operations rather than wait for the audit, put your objective measures in place and go for it. Really internally scrutinize, self-assess, and do anything you can to establish and monitor your internal controls and audits and procedures, and be sure that every member of the organization, particularly those with specific training and needs who might be high risk category individuals or functions, are very well trained and ready to comply with audits and procedures as needed. Next slide. Non-compliance can have several consequences or repercussions, where failure, of course, might include financial penalties and a loss of future funding, in addition to disallowance of costs, where you're required to actually reimburse the government for the funds you have taken. The grant being suspended or terminated in the middle of the project implementation period, where you lose current funding, you then end up having to pay your own payroll to your staff that had worked and so forth. Withholding payments delays the receipt of your funds. If an audit finding is negative, it can impact your future funding. Debarment, meaning you're not able to receive future federal or state grants, can occur. Reputational damage, where loss of trust from funders and the public may occur. And then legal action may ensue in severe cases of fraud or gross negligence. And the key there is that we must understand and adhere to conditions, this being paramount to avoiding severe consequences. Next slide. There are many resources that are provided by GOCAP in a variety of modalities to help us navigate and comply with all grant requirements. The GOCAP website, of course, is your first go-to, because then you can search at gocap.maryland.gov by looking for grants or funding sections. The GMS GOCAP system is your portal for your applications, reporting, and grant documents. Your grants management manual and instructions provide detailed guidance on policies and procedures. Your GOCAP grant manager will serve as your primary point of contact for specific grant-related questions. And of course, 2 CFR Part 200 uniform guidance under the federal regulations code is your authoritative source for federal grant regulations. We recommend that you regularly check the GOCAP website or designate someone who is responsible for doing so, and your grants management system portal for the latest updates and guidance in this regard. Next slide, please. Oh, we're here. I can't believe it. I'm so sad to say. It's Friday Eve and we get to wrap up soon. So of course we got 30 minutes of Q&A, but we're about done talking. So let's talk about our key takeaways. In addition to summarizing today, we want you to walk away with all of the gold nuggets that you need. And so here we've covered our GOCAP general and special conditions, our new 15% de minimis indirect cost rate since July 1 of this year. And these are vital for successful grant management. GOCAP grants, of course, are governed by both universal general conditions and project-specific special conditions. Key compliance areas include financial management, reporting, procurement and subrecipient monitoring. Maryland SB 127 that went into effect July 1 of this year increases the de minimis indirect cost rate from 10% to 15%. And GOCAP has adopted this rate of 15% as a significant benefit for eligible grantees. Strict adherence to all conditions, general and special, is vital to avoid severe consequences and to ensure successful grant outcomes. Our action item here is to review the current GOCAP grant agreement we have and familiarize yourself with the latest grant management system instructions, especially regarding the new indirect cost rate. And now we invite you for your Q&A. Thank you all so very much. You've been so wonderful as an audience. You stuck with us right up until the very end. And we're so grateful for you all. We again remind you that you have a pre and post assessment to receive your certificates of completion in compliance with your requirements. Please do scan your codes. Bravo, bravo. Scan your codes on the slide and ensure that you have taken both of them. And if you can't remember, just take it again just in case. Mr. Russell, round of applause to you for your warehouse of knowledge. You know, I wonder in all the years of his experience, how he catalogs information in his brain and just pulls it out of the file so quickly.
I'm full of useless knowledge. We can talk about that or the Golden Girls. I'll think of something.
Oh, Golden Girl! You okay? Yeah, we simpatico with that. Y'all
Anytime, any place.
Look, we're going to entertain Q&As now, and of course, we're wishing you and yours a wonderful weekend and a resting and enjoyable one. Thank you all so much for your participation and engagement. On behalf of our Nadria consulting team, Miss Alyssa Flynn, who drove the slides, she is our content provider. She is all things aficionado, Mr. Wilson's right hand, and of course, none other than Adrian Wilson. Thank you all so very much for ensuring that this training went off without a hitch. We thank you all and the State of Maryland GOCAP office team for all that you did to ensure today's training success. Have a wonderful rest of your days.
Thank you.
Can you guys drop the links to the post survey in the chat? Because the QR code didn't work for me.
Yes, we will redrop that for you. Thank you.
Thank you.